This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheists United Studios Podcast Network. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Welcome back. As you heard in the new intro, the podcast is now a part of the Atheists United Studios Podcast Network. As we begin the new year, I want to remind you that we have the Deconversion Anonymous Facebook group at facebook.com/group/deconversion. Please consider joining and become a part of the community. I want to thank all the patrons on patreon.com. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. Thank you to Sharon, Joel, Lars, Ray, Rob, Peter, Tracy, Jimmy, and Jason. Your support is much appreciated. If you would like an ad-free experience of the podcast, become a patron at any level at patreon.com/gracefulatheist. You will also get the podcast early-ish. On most weeks, you'll get it a few hours early. On occasion, you'll get it a couple of days early. Hang on until the end for the final thoughts section. I'll talk a bit more about some of the plans for 2023, including what the community will be doing. As always, special thanks to Mike T for editing today's show. On to today's show. My guest today is Evan Clark. Evan's bio says he is a humanist entrepreneur, a political consultant, and a public speaker with over 14 years experience tinkering with secular communities. In 2019, Evan was hired as Atheists United's first executive director. Atheists United's mission statement is, our mission is to build thriving atheist communities, empower people to express their secular values, and promote separation of government and religion. But much more than that, Evan is a secular grace kind of humanist, and you're going to hear that in the interview. Evan reached out to me in the fall of 2022 and asked if the Graceful Atheist Podcast was interested in becoming a part of the Atheists United Studios Podcast Network. And I am very excited to say that as of you hearing this, we are now a part of that podcast network, and I am excited about my sibling podcasts and the work that Evan, myself, and the sibling podcasts will do together over the next and following years. Here is Evan Clark to tell his story. Evan Clark, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Evan, you're currently the executive director of Atheists United, and I love your bio on the site. It says, Evan is a humanist entrepreneur, political consultant, and public speaker with over 14 years experience tinkering with secular communities. So my first question to you is, did you start at 12?
No, I'm not,
Okay.
not that young.
Okay.
Oh man, I'm glad I still look that young. No, I started in college. I attended California Lutheran University and I started their atheist club.
Okay.
I cold emailed the Secular Student Alliance and immediately got a group started by the end of my freshman year. And it was wild. It's a really unique experience starting a Secular Student Alliance. There's only maybe 300 or 400 of us in the world that have done that before. And then of those, I'm one of like 10 that did it at a religious university. So we had kind of a unique experience. And I will say Cal Lutheran is not your Bible thumping Liberty University or Azusa Pacific or something. It is a open liberal arts college. And we had a really great experience. But yeah, I think it is a unique experience being in a religious space. I mean, most of us are in a religious culture and we deal with religious politics, but then having your college environment have prayers in weird places and pastors that are on the payroll and a church they close down classes for an hour each day so people can go.
Oh, wow.
But luckily it wasn't forced. So there were plenty of secular students on campus and we built a really unique community. And that was my first. That's what really kind of got me excited about this whole thing. I remember our last meeting in college. The last one for me after 4 years running this group. I challenged everyone, like, do you think there's a need for spaces like this after college? And I had already made up my mind by then, but I was trying to see, where everyone was at and what they thought of it. And yeah, I mean, to really think that 10, 11 years later that I could get paid to be an atheist organizer is just mind-blowing. Dreams do come true for the occasional privileged white guy.
I think we're going to circle back to some of your, your growing up years, but I want to talk really quick about Cal Lutheran. So my understanding is that you also became student body president there.
Yeah, that's right.
How does that work? An atheist at a Christian university?
Yeah, so I mean, it's funny to think back. We were celebrating its 50th year as a university when I was student body president, and I imagine there were probably at least one or two other non-theists. But
Yeah, yeah,
but there's a difference between being a public non-theist, right? Like we know we've had many elected officials in Congress that are non-theists, but they won't allow themselves to be that publicly. On all surveys, they identify as Jewish or Christian or Muslim,
right.
and I think that's what's unique. So I was the first out public atheist in that position. And yeah, honestly, it really wasn't that big a deal when I ran for student body president. It was more controversial that I was running against a former roommate than it was that I was running
Good
as,
friends and
as the
yeah,
leader of the secular student group. Yeah. So while I do know some people, it probably frustrated or gave them a bad taste in their mouth. And I do know the local press decided to run with it here and there. Overall, the campus was very supportive and never really thought twice. And I remember by the time I was getting out of college, the university was bragging about our secular student group as
hmm
another form of diversity on campus. Look, we have these
yeah,
atheists, and look at our
yeah.
religious diversity. And I do think that helped kickstart kind of an interfaith era for Cal Lutheran, and they've been really active with interfaith work ever since. And I like to think that we helped nudge that along.
That's awesome. That's actually, I think, a positive impact. We say sometimes that there are better and worse versions of religion, and one that's more ecumenical is definitely better. And so it sounds like you had that kind of impact on the university.
Yeah, yeah. I think I don't know. It's really interesting building a secular space and then thinking about how that relates to the rest of the community and culture that you exist in. So, Atheists United was founded in 1982 over a separation of church and state case in LA.
hmm
It was a tenuous existence, and to be an open atheist in 1982 was kind of a, you know, extremely intense experience. You're
Yeah.
talking about maybe losing your job or having to confront family if it's public suddenly. And yeah, Cal Lutheran in 2012, not as intense as 1982
Okay. Yeah.
atheist organizing. But what I will say is, yeah, it brought the conservative Christians out a little bit more. It brought the other clubs that did interfaith work a little bit more vocal. And it gave them, I think, space for that. What was unique about our group is we explored religion. Most
hmm
secular student groups look like philosophy clubs. Actually, it's because they recruit mostly from the philosophy clubs. That's why they look that way. There's a self selection bias there. Where at Cal Lutheran, we decided because we are identifying publicly as non theists in an explicitly at least a name theistic space, we need to know what we don't believe if we're going to claim that publicly and organize around that. And so what we did is we did anthropological exploration of religion. We went to
Oh, cool.
churches and synagogues and mosques and pagan rituals and Mormon temples, and we engaged. We sat through their ceremonies, and we got a crash course in experiential religious studies. I learned so much more through my club than I did through even the religion classes that I took because we had firsthand experience. And yeah, I'll never forget how much we learned and how much empathy I built and how many patterns I noticed about religion because we weren't afraid of it. We, openly engaged it.
Man, that's incredible because one of the things that I think concerns me is my point of view is very specifically having had belief and then going through a deconversion process and being on the other side. Some of my criticisms of the atheist community of, maybe the last 15, 20 years is kind of that hostility towards religious people. And I think that comes from a lack of understanding. There's no point of recognition of the humanity of what it is like to have believed. And I think just taking a comparative religion class alone, but even going
Right.
as far as you did to actually sit in on other religious ceremonies is like super valuable. And I think it also, not just from the empathy point of view, but it also inoculates you a bit,
Right.
right? I think people can be susceptible to, if they have a particularly difficult moment in their lives, the love bombing effect of some religions, and having exposure to that could actually be an inoculation.
Yes, and like it's such a complex topic talking about how people came to their non-theism. So there as a community organizer who grew up secular, which we can talk about in a second. I grew up in Massachusetts. I went to Catholic school in first grade and immediately said this isn't working for me.
Okay.
All these they start with stories of Genesis, and I was picking those apart one by one, and
Yeah. Yeah.
the nuns hated me. I was the most annoying little brat.
Okay.
I was asking questions about how Adam and Eve had two boys and populated the world. And like, I didn't even know what sex was, but I was like giving them questions that made them have to like think or engage that topic. And so they just wouldn't. And that frustrated me more. And so, yeah, I decided this God thing isn't working for me in first grade. I didn't find a word like atheist until sixth grade. I remember
Sure.
flipping through a dictionary, trying to not read in one of my English
Yeah.
classes or something. And yeah, I found this word atheist and I go, oh, there's a word for me. I like
Oh, wow.
freaked out. It was such a powerful, like an identity moment. And then I started using it and realized not everyone liked the word.
Yeah.
Um,
Has
and
some
that was its own.
connotations, a little baggage.
Yeah.
Can I ask real quick?
Yeah. Yeah. Please.
Was your family religious then? And how did they respond to that?
Yeah. It was more, I'll call it split religious. My dad grew up like secular San Diego household. My mom grew up in more of a Roman Catholic Massachusetts household. So
Okay.
I was born in California, but at the age of 2, we moved to Massachusetts. And so I think my mom just had this idea that if you have the money, you raise your kids in a nice Catholic private school.
Yeah.
And that's why I went to the Catholic school that I did. But yeah, when it immediately wasn't working out, and we happened to be in the one town in America where the public school is better than the private school,
Right.
I was able to transition to the public school. And though my mom tried to get us to go to church, and again, this is Catholic, Roman Catholic at that
Mhm.
style of church, my dad didn't like he would do it for my mom, but it wasn't something he ever cared about. He clearly didn't believe in. He chose to watch football on Sundays rather than go to church half the time. And so very quickly I wanted to go, I want to watch football with dad. I don't want to go to church. I hate church. I hate dressing up. I hate this ritual. It's boring. They make me sit in CCD and it's all bullshit. Like I immediately just fought back so hard.
Yeah.
And my mom finally made a deal with me. She said, if you finish first communion, I'll let you decide if you ever want to go to church again. So I said,
Okay.
sign me up. Let's do it. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm going to win this.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's exactly what happened. I did it a year late because I had complained so hard the year before about leaving the church. And yeah, I finished the first communion. I got my dumb little wafer and I never went to church again, not till college, actually. And so I actually feel bad because I was so religiously uneducated from when that like fourth, fifth grade experience up until college. Like I didn't know the difference between a Catholic and a Christian until
Mhm.
I suddenly was in college and decided there should be a space for atheists. And then everybody wanted to talk about their religious traditions and like, Lutheran and Methodist and all these things I'd never heard before. I have to now really engage. Yeah, so it's been a fascinating journey, but I identify more with the people who grew up without religion. I just have a little bit of more cultural baggage than those that grew up with atheist parents.
Right. 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 Okay.
Yeah.
And then, Evan, I think something that you and I share is, and I think you're doing it better than I am, but is an obsession with community. So, from my perspective, it's that religion provides a really built-in community and the platform for friendships and relationships and building a sense of belonging. And that on this side of deconversion, that is much harder to facilitate in a secular environment. And yet, human beings need that. And so, like, I'm just obsessed with ways that we can bring each other together in a secular environment. And you are out there on the front line doing that kind of thing. Why is community important to you? Like, how did that become a
Oh,
thing for
yeah.
you?
Oh, why is community important? Yeah, well, you're gonna have to get me to stop talking eventually on
Okay.
this topic 'cause
Okay.
yeah, you once you get me wound up, it doesn't
Yeah.
stop, but, my poor girlfriend's heard my rants on these 1,000
Yes.
times. But also to finish the last point, people come at their non-theism from so many different perspectives, where I come at it from more of I grew up mostly secular with a little bit of religious baggage. If you were traumatized by religion, if you have sexual shame, or if you spent tens of thousands of dollars on superstitious things, if you have guilt still that is riddling your that is destroying your life, then I understand why people have really intense negative responses to religion.
Yeah.
And the institutional political side is we see clear, obvious dangers. We see, our queer friends. We see our people with reproductive organs not like mine being legislated.
Yeah.
We see immigration law even being connected to religion. Like we see oppression that people can draw direct lines to. And if they care about justice and social justice in those means, and they can suddenly see this as either a tool or an inspiration for those, yeah, to me, it's an obvious rational way that they got to that conclusion, even if I think some of their arguments might be broken
Hmm.
that lead to bad conclusions. Like, I don't think, like, religion for me is often more of a tool in a space than it is the actual oppression. The reason people come to belief, is that always inspired by the ideas they have, or did they already have those ideas and then they used religious belief arguments to justify those? And
Right.
I think
Right.
when you get more nuance and the deeper you study philosophy, rational thought, community organizing, I'm much more humbled about people. I just don't think we're the rational brained ubermensch people think we are. Like, I think we're very flawed and we're very biased. And yeah, I just don't think the judgment of religious people or religious institutions, which again is one of the like hardest things to define in social science.
Sure.
What
Yes.
what
Yeah.
is religion, right? Like, do we count football stadiums as next to churches, or is a sorority a religion, or is a Buddhist non-theist organization a religion? Like, these are really complicated questions that social scientists debate to this day. Moving to the community question and away from the first one, we desperately need community, but it's going to look different for everyone. So, if we start from just the research perspective, if I wasn't to make more personal arguments,
Hmm.
research shows that when you participate, I should back up. The way the research was done is more fascinating. They actually found a discrepancy between atheists and theists when
Hmm.
they looked at quality of life, reported levels of happiness, life expectancy, how much you volunteer, and how much you donate to charity. But when you dive into the study, and I should say the discrepancy was bad for the non-theists. It showed
Right.
that religious
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
they lived longer, they gave more, they reported higher levels of happiness, right? Like, it was like, wow, geez, I guess I'm supposed to be religious if I want to live a good life.
Yeah.
But when you dive into the research, it has nothing to do with intensity of belief. So it didn't matter that you believe 10 times harder in God than someone lower on the spectrum. The correlation and causation seem to be more attached to your participation in religious community. So
Hmm.
basically, the more you went to a congregational model, the more you participated in pro-social behavior, the more pro-social benefits you got, which
Right.
which matches suddenly with all of the other social science research that says when you hang out with people, you have less depression. When you,
Right.
when you volunteer more, you like feel happier and you give more to charity. And so it's really cool when you look at research in that sense, that what I do as an atheist organizer, even if I took the non-theism part out, if I completely removed atheism and any mention of humanism and all of these recovering from religion thing, even if I removed all of that and all we did was get together at a bar and like party once a month, I would be doing a social good that could be improving how much you volunteer, how much you donate, how long you live, how happy you are. Like, community in and of itself is a proven social good. And that is because we are hardwired social animals. And we just, this is a fact. We like can't ignore it. And it exists in different ways for different people. Like, people are finding online community in ways today that just wasn't possible 25 years ago. We have, hybrid communities. We have, a lot of structural designs to our society, like third places that no longer exist, that make it harder for us to actually do this work. But yeah, I will always be an advocate for community because, forgetting all of the other bigger political and philosophical arguments I could make, and that could make you a good person or our society a better place. Like, I really
Hmm.
just think at the end of the day, like, we improve people's lives by getting them together in community. And in a religious dominated society where when they leave religion, there are often zero options for you to
Right.
hang out with other people that share your values on Sunday, people that might visit you in the hospital if you're sick, people that you trust to help you raise your children, people that might be your dating network or your job network. Like, we leave that to religion in our society. And beyond that, it turns into political organizing, and it turns into, financial access, and it turns into all of these other forms of power. So yeah, this is why, I get asked sometimes by atheists, like, why do you need an atheist community? I'm like, it's not about atheism, it's about atheists. Atheists are people, and people need community, and people have needs, and they have goals and aspirations and cares, and that you can build a community around. Atheism gets really boring really quick.
Absolutely. And I mean, you've basically described the impetus for this
Yeah.
podcast is, like pick whatever term, right? Humanism, what have you. We talk about secular grace, but like
Yes.
it's acknowledging the humanity of each of
Yeah.
us and our need for connection with each other. And that doesn't go away when you walk away from religion.
And this is an evolution that's happening. When I think about the secular movement or the atheist movement, these are phrases you'll hear thrown around by organizers like me a lot. You need to consider that there's different types of movements that are happening simultaneously. So, one is a political movement where we are hiring lawyers and lobbyists, and we're building these institutions in DC that can represent us. And we're fighting cultural stigma and political stigma, and we are have some goals that we as atheists have all come around together for, like separation of church and state, or um, I don't know, taxing churches or whatever it might be. We have a few aligned things that we, in large masses, have built political power for, but we also seem to have some cultural things we've organized around as well. We are trying to figure out how to build institutions that, frankly, look a lot like classic religions.
Yeah.
And you see Oasis and Sunday Assembly and Ethical Culture Society that have come up over the past 100 years that are building these spaces where secular people can have congregational models of gathering, where we can maybe still sing together, or maybe check in on each other if we're sick, or build food networks in case anybody gets behind or loses a job. Like, when I look at Norway and I
Hmm.
see a very secular country, and I see a humanist movement that doesn't talk about politics the way we do in the US and isn't building atheist organizations the way we do in the US, I've thought a lot about where the difference is, where they look at
Right.
us and they go, why on earth would you need an atheist organization? We're going to go play with some humanist models. We'll come up with
Yeah.
like a youth coming of age ceremony, but like, that's all we need. And the deeper thing I've noticed is most of this comes back to politics. In the US, we don't fix homelessness with our
Right.
government. We
Right.
don't fix hunger with our government. We don't provide health care to all of our citizens. And so, what is the most powerful, most well funded institution outside of government that then steps up in those spaces? And right now in the United States today, that's religion. We just don't have giant secular NGOs that own most hospitals and who provide most homeless care and provide food distributions. Like, this is almost all being organized in religious spaces, which furthers religious privilege and gives religious power. Right? If I was to think like a religious authoritarian, the first thing you would do is try to claim government power, which we're seeing. This
Yeah.
is the classic modern
For sure.
Christian nationalist religious right. But if you can't get that, the second best you can do is limit government power and completely control all social and institutional spaces beyond that. And that's why, creating secular education, creating public schools was probably one of the biggest secular achievement in world history for most countries.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think we stop and appreciate enough sometimes the secular public school movement and what that meant for separating religion and government,
Right.
and why religious institutions that are authoritarian all want private schools to take back over, and they want to end public funding of education, right? Now apply that to churches, now apply that to food, now apply that to housing, right? They get to preserve power in that way. And so, you know, yeah, we provide community with Atheists United, but we also get to challenge that religious power by also doing our own food distribution, by also getting involved in local advocacy, by showing up at a bunch of events that we've never shown up for the past, however old this country is now. So anyways, it's really interesting. There's so many dynamics for how you can come at it. And like you have a political movement with some very clear political goals. You can have a social movement that, maybe has your media figures that are constantly in a cultural debate over theistic ideas. But then we also have like local power questions that are both cultural and political that I think local institutions can solve and support, and it's not just are we providing food for people, which is amazing, but it's how are we educating the youth that are going to take over our society? How are we building rituals that are not shamed based, but aspirational and critical and thought provoking and pluralistic? That's what's to me exciting about the potential of humanist communities and atheists. We don't have to just be reactionary. There's something unique about a secular perspective that we can offer the world.
I think you just said the magic word there too, that pluralism. I think some people can be
Sure.
afraid of the word secularism, and yet
Sure.
we are not trying to enforce unbelief, on everyone else. It's just to make room for freedom of religion and freedom from
Right.
religion, and that actually has, as you've just eloquently enumerated, massively positive impacts on society, including things like public education.
And some bros on the internet do want that, right? Like
Sure.
I've actually started to use the phrase atheist supremacy that I think they're actually arguing for. They really believe that other people are broken and they need to fix them with atheism. They literally look at them as less than. During the pandemic, there were some disgusting comments by a lot of atheists online that I noticed on Twitter and Facebook around like, well, at least they're killing off lots of Christians. And I'm just disgusted by comments like that. Because
Yeah.
sure, if there's a Christian pastor who is getting on the airs and saying the vaccines are crap, ignore the science, you shouldn't do all of that. I think they are in positions of power and they have more responsibility. And I care a lot less about if they as hypocrites get hurt by that.
Right.
But
Right.
most religious people are followers. They are part of a community. They don't have the time to go think about vaccine efficacy. They don't have time. They're in a crap economy with kids and a full life and trying to maintain friendships and keep out of depression during a closed society. And then the person you trust most in the world tells you this is an unsafe vaccine and you shouldn't go get them. And then you get sick because of that. Like, are you a victim?
Yeah.
Or did you bring that upon yourself? And I think a lot of atheists, because we come to atheism through such individual means, and because so much of our language comes from often libertarian Western like culture,
Hmm.
we treat everyone with this like you are the only one that can answer any question and you have to use rationality, and by rationality I mean like the Jefferson debate in the street with
Yeah.
everyone,
Yeah. Yeah.
philosophy, which doesn't recognize that that's not how most humans think. That is not how we actually come to conclusions in most cases. Like it's a very emotional journey for most people to have religion or to lose religion, as much as it is a rational decision. And rationality is informed by emotions, but that's a longer rant.
Again, Evan, I can't agree with you strongly enough here. This is literally a conversation that's been going around our community because of, I think, Genetically Modified Skeptic recently did a post about apologetics and counter apologetics aren't useful, which I tend to agree with. And there was a bunch of pushback from lots of people. And the point is that it's the philosophy people that you were just talking about, right? I love philosophy. It's like, it definitely affects me, but I don't represent everyone.
Yeah, I can hang with philosophers as much as anyone, and I love it, and I love deep questions, and I'm one of the few people that will spend hours and hours and hours in those discussions compared
Right.
to my girlfriend, for instance, who has zero patience for them. And she's just
Yes.
like, does it impact my life? If it does, how does it hurt or not? And I want the side that improves, doesn't hurt, right? Like there's no debating abortion access with her, right? The philosophy around that is a waste of her time. She has finished with the debate and it is emotionally painful to continue to have. And I think that's a recognition of how humans function, right? Like,
Right.
to be a philosophy bro is abnormal.
Yes.
It to
Exactly.
sit and say I can ponder literally everything while things burn around me, like that is a privilege on a privilege. And so, anyways, what I do think though is we need to recognize that there is some supremacist thought that comes from other places, right? White supremacy exists regardless of religion. We have
Sure.
other forms of supremacy, gender supremacy. We also have religious supremacy, and some people I think learn the wrong lessons. They still hold on to some cultural ideas that religion, mostly conservative religion, has propagated, which is that you have to be right and that you need to fix other people with the truth. And no, that's not actually true. What we need is a society that functions well and props people up and helps them get through their lives.
Right.
And what I find when I look around right now is I see a lot of churches and synagogues and mosques and temples that are doing way more work than we are when it comes to justice work, when it comes to fighting climate change, when it comes to science education, like literally the thing we speak most about.
Yeah.
I've met progressive churches talk more about science than, or I wouldn't say talk more about, we talk a lot. But maybe organize more
Yeah.
about like science-based policy in some cases. And if I look at that, and I also look over here and I see Richard Spencer, who's an open atheist organizing the Charlottesville rally with freaking Nazis, and I go, well, should I stand with an atheist because they're an atheist, or should I stand with these people who I agree with 99.9% on like values questions? And it's obvious. It's so I've never met an atheist who are like, yeah, let's go hang out with the Nazis,
Right.
which defeats the argument that belief is the most important thing. It just destroys that idea. It is actions, it is values, it is what we organize around. It is our humanity, not our beliefs. And when we recognize that, yeah, belief impacts that. Belief isn't completely meaningless, right? Like philosophy is good so that we keep growing as a species, but
Hmm.
that's a feature of a secular ideology. When you let go of magical thinking, then appeals to tradition is a logical fallacy. Well, what's the opposite of that? That means progress. We have to challenge our ideas, right? They have to use methods like the scientific method for them to be more true. And we will, over time, come to better conclusions. And philosophy is one of the tools in that toolkit. But yeah, when that's all it is, and suddenly it allows you to hold what I would consider a supremacist belief over someone else, like I actually think you're more harmful than helpful. And we don't do that in my community.
I actually love that verbiage, recognizing the shared values.
Yeah.
You may know my story that my wife is still a believer. And I
Mhm.
talk a lot about with her, that the shared values that we have, that's what our marriage can stand on.
People don't know this. There's actually a staffer for American Atheists who is a Christian.
Oh,
Like,
wow. Okay.
it's
Yeah.
completely possible. I have one of my best friends from college. He joined my secular student group. He was an agnostic at the time. He went to Europe for study abroad. He came back and he's like, I need to take you out to lunch. I got something to tell you. And I'm like, oh, cool. He's going to come out as gay or something, or
Yeah.
he got someone pregnant. I have no idea what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
And he's like, so the only book I took with me was the Quran, and I'm a Muslim now.
Oh,
And I
wow.
said,
Okay.
cool. And he kept
Yeah.
coming to my secular student group. He became the vice president of my student group in college. And like,
Right.
I still hang out with him to this day. I couldn't imagine like losing that friendship over you happen to go to a mosque, not an atheist group with your time. He does more good work than most atheists I know. Like that's what bonds us. Yeah, we disagree on a few things. Oh boy.
Sure.
Like it gets awkward when I talk about like how he's gonna teach his kids about religion, but that's part of society. I don't know. I'm okay with that. I'd rather have that conversation than find out he's a Nazi.
Yes.
But happens to be an atheist or is like thinking it's okay that Trump wants to end the Constitution. Like that's way more problematic to me.
To kind of wrap this up, I often say that, again, this concept of secular grace, if you want to
Yeah.
be good to people and you justify that in a theistic way, and I want to be good to people and I justify that in a humanistic way, let's just go be good to people, right? Like,
Yeah.
we should be allies in that work, even though we
Yeah.
disagree with each other's justifications.
And this could be hard. Like I came into the atheist movement during the new atheism era. Like I ate up a lot of the talking points around like belief leads to action, and it's
Hmm.
taken me a lot to try to deconstruct that and look at people more as a bunch of monkeys in shoes trying to figure out how to live lives. Um, but yeah, I think there are some interesting questions here that could be explored more. I'm probably going to leave them to more philosophers and thought leaders than community organizers like me. But to some extent, belief obviously matters a little. Like we know it does impact actions a bit. We do know it's attached to identity, it's attached to politics, it's attached to how you organize. So I don't want to be completely flippant about that. Like I do think, the way I'm attacking Nazi ideas, like I think they
Right.
need to be challenged.
Beliefs have consequences. Yes.
Yeah, but I just don't think they're as strong as people often talk about in atheist spaces. I
Mhm.
really just don't think it's like I, believe in insert evangelical like uh interpretation of the Bible, and that means like I beat up gay people. Like we don't actually find those correlations. We do find the community organizations and institutions that organize around like oppressing gay people like happen to be using religion as their tool, and there's some correlations there. But I don't know, yeah, where the limits are on that. Because yeah, I think if you're talking to your toaster and your toaster's telling you I need to go shoot up a school, like we clearly care about that belief and want to intervene in our society. Um, but yeah, like the local pastor that helps out with our atheist programs in LA here, like he calls himself a Christian atheist, and I still don't know what that means. Like,
Yes.
do I need to try to challenge that and fix that? Or, when I was dating a lot after college, and I would go on a date with somebody who believed in astrology, and I like 99 out of 100 times, that's like, it just means they believe in ghosts. Like it's very similar to like it
Hmm.
impacts their life zero. They like
Yeah.
find movies a little bit more interesting if they believe in ghosts, but it always scares me a little bit because if you're willing to believe that some bullshit about the stars can impact like who your identity is, then couldn't it impact you thinking vaccines are bad or something?
Right.
Like
Right.
I worry about that, but I don't have good solutions around it. And I find, given our short time on the earth, given our limited resources, given the community I'm working on and what we're prioritizing, there's so much more value I can do from a efficacy stance of getting atheists together and doing good work and providing transformational spaces for them rather than being the one that fixes bad ideas of other people. But I won't completely shut down the people that do that. Like I do think education's important. It's just education rarely changes the world as much as mobilizing does.
So I want to key off of something that you just said there too, and this can sound religious, but providing the platform for good works, as it were, however
Yeah.
you define that, giving people the opportunity to, use what they are good at in their hobbies or what have you in some kind of way that impacts the community in a positive way. And I know that like you guys recently have done a project, Atheist Street Pirates, where you were cleaning up
Yeah.
like proselytizing signs and things of that nature. And you had religious people with
Yeah.
you also doing that. If you want to talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, so that program's called Atheist Street Pirates. We founded it during the pandemic. We noticed a lot of illegal religious propaganda.
Hmm.
Most cities probably have this, and you just kind of forget that it's there
Yeah.
after a while.
Yeah.
But maybe a highway overpass, somebody put up a sign that said, "Ask Jesus for mercy," or some random telephone pole by the library says, Jesus is coming. Yeah, there's a bunch of random um, propaganda like that essentially furthers Christian privilege and normalizes this idea that everything is a Christian space, but they're often on public land. They're on, highways, they're on bridges, they're on telephone poles. Well, that's illegal. We're
Yeah.
shared land. That has to be a secular space. They definitely didn't get permission from the city to put those up. But what we find is cities don't have the time and resources to always take those down. And so we started just by mapping them. We created this Google map and we started, seeing how big the phenomenon was. And then one of them that was there for a while, we decided, oh, okay, we're going to go at like 2 a.m, see if we can take this down. Like, hopefully it doesn't fall on the highway. Of course, it's LA. The highway doesn't slow down at 2 a.m.
Yes.
And there's still a bazillion cars out there. And yeah, this kind of kicked off this really odd program that we get a ton of press for, where we directly map and take down these illegal religious propaganda. And it's inspired even religious people who believe in separation of church and state, who believe that for this to be a pluralistic space, you have to also have freedom from religion. Freedom of religion is completely meaningless. I'm sure a million guests have said this, but it's completely meaningless without your ability to say no to any one religion that approaches you.
Right.
So yeah, I have a local pastor I met at a local Pride event, and he came out with us. He loved it. He took one of the signs to his congregation and preached that week about our program.
Yeah.
That the Atheist Street Pirates were doing. So yeah, we've done some really cool things in that sense. And I think what you're getting at, though, as a question is like, should we institutionalize? Should we build these things that should be there for 50 or 100 or 500 years? And this is the question I always think about. What are we building and why? And what is the long-term goal of this? Because yeah, in some sense, most atheist organizations are reactionary. They came into existence in the past 50 years, and it's because of the rise of the religious right. If the country just turned into Norway, we'd be looking around like, why on earth do you need an atheist community where you talk about atheism and Christianity and blah, 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 right? You will notice that if you go to Portugal, you
Yeah.
go to Denmark, you go to Norway, they just don't exist. It's
Yeah.
actually hard to find atheist communities the way we have in the US. US, we have one or two or three atheist communities for every major city, for hundreds and hundreds of groups you can join. And a lot of that's politics, right? It's just obvious. We have a religious political movement, and the first and most important group that they will oppress is the non-religious. We are the canary in the coal mine for secular government and for a pluralistic society. In some ways, this is my frustration with our religious allies, including the Satanic Temple and even Unitarian Universalists, is because they think of religious pluralism in only a religious context, and they can't recognize that most atheists want to also be non-religious. Even if we join communities, the language is really important to us. The identity is really important to us. And the government interaction is really important to us. So yeah, it's really cool that the Satanists can also give a prayer, but what about a group that doesn't pray?
Right.
That
Yeah.
is important. And we need to look at a future where most of us don't pray. It doesn't matter. Now you're forcing us to come up with a prayer to be equal. That is not welcoming. That is not our idea of a secular government. And yeah, it's better than just one religion having access. At least we have a seat at the table. They'll let us do something. But yeah, I like to call it, one is the classic secular argument of a pure secular state where religion has zero power in religion. And then the other is secular light, where all religions get equal power.
Right.
But what happens then is the religions with the most resources and the most organizing, they're the ones that get more time. If I have to compete with the evangelicals over who gets prayers at city council, I see the next 50 years they're going to out-organize
Right.
us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not for lack of trying, but they just have so much more money and so many more people that hang out in congregational models that, yeah, it could take me 40, 50 years to match that. So that's my concern, and why I really think the secular government argument matters. This is why we don't put up our own signs with the Atheist Street Pirates. We get asked all
Exactly.
the time, why don't you just go put up atheist signs? I'm like, well, I don't want to get into a religious arms race.
Yeah.
We're going to lose.
But that's so telling, Evan. I mean, that is so important. That exact statement that you are not putting up, you shouldn't believe signs.
Yeah.
You should become an atheist. You're just saying, hey, this is a secular space, and so there shouldn't
Right.
be proselytizing here.
Yeah. And I think that's a really, I posted recently on Instagram. I did this video. I observed some guys proselytizing. They walked, old guys walked up to a young guy and his kid in a park. I have a minivan and I sometimes like work in the back of it, random places around LA. And so I observed this whole thing right up close, and they just immediately started talking to him about Jesus, and you need to, oh man, and everyone's broken, and Jesus is the only way to get saved. Can we pray for you? And like I just watched this like 25-minute interaction. The poor kid was like trying to run around, and like dad was
Yes.
trapped.
Yeah.
And I put up a video about how like atheist groups don't proselytize, right? And I
Yeah.
got a lot of pushback on that, both from atheists who
Hmm.
some think we should, some from people who have experienced atheists who have pushed themselves into their lives to talk about belief. Um, and yeah, I think it's really important that if we care about a pluralistic society, which is a place where all have equal access and all are treat each other equally, it doesn't mean I believe that they're right. When I do interfaith work, the one thing we agree on is that we all disagree.
Yes.
I love interfaith work because yeah, it's literally like I can walk up to a Muslim and I go like, I think you're nuts. And they look at me and they go, I think you're nuts. And I go, cool. Should we plant that tree now? And they go,
Yes.
yeah. Um,
Exactly.
like that's okay. That's cool. That's a society. That's a functioning society. Yeah, we could debate that in our spare time. But proselytizing to me, my personal definition of it is going out of your way and pushing yourself into other people's lives.
Yeah.
I've never, ever, ever met an atheist organizer who wants to go door to door to talk about atheism. Yeah, I will buy ads on Facebook to promote an event we're doing. I will, follow the laws and rules around like promoting ourselves, but I don't think we should have special privilege and access to your life unconsensually.
Right.
I respect your freedom to say no, and we will present our ideas in some places, but it's not my responsibility to convince you. And again, if everyone was Nazis, maybe that's what I would be doing. I'd be like trying to
Right.
convince you to not be a Nazi.
Yes.
Um, and we have that in different forms today. But I don't know. I think there's so much more work that needs to be done for the millions, literally millions of atheists, agnostics, humanists, and other non-religious identities in the US who don't even have community right now. They
Right.
don't even know
Right.
that there's spaces they can gather and you can meet other people like you and you can raise kids in those spaces free of any dogma at any time that cares about critical thinking the way you do. People that might be able to visit you in the hospital if you get sick or help you
Mhm.
out if you lose your job. Like that is so much more valuable in most people's day-to-day life than your, obvious argument they could have Googled about the problem of evil. So I don't know. That's where my time and energy is these days. And I'm encouraged that there's a lot more people doing it and there's a lot more resources for it, but we're so underfunded. I mean, like you ever drive by like a Methodist church and you're like, oh God, that 200-year-old building. I wonder what it would be like
Yeah.
to like
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
our work in something like that. And then you think about the budget they probably have. They probably spend more on upkeep of that building than like every atheist group in California put together.
Right.
Let alone the pastor's salary, the youth pastor, the secretary, the contractors, the marketing budget. They probably spend more on print materials than I have for 16 programs in LA.
Right. Atheists United is about, and I'll just do your mission statement here. Our mission is to build thriving atheist communities, empower people to express their secular values, and promote separation of government and religion. The reason you and I are talking is that you have also started a podcast network, and the Graceful Atheist is going to become a part of that. So I want to talk about a little bit what that idea is, what you're trying to accomplish there. And we can talk about the existing podcast there, Humanist Experience, Nomadic Humanists, and the Beyond Atheism guys that interviewed recently.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I'm so excited that you're joining the network and that there's growth in this type of content. When I look around atheist media these days, I see a lot of, uh, I'll call it Christian talk radio for atheists.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Like,
Yeah.
and it's not inherently bad. Like again, I think there's a lot of people craving that content. If I was just coming out of an evangelical tradition and I need the language for some of these ideas I have, if I need to like, I'm thinking through a problem about God's existence or whatever my pastor or priest told me about this topic, like, yeah, listening to some of these these people who talk about those ideas is actually radically valuable. But there's a lot of questions that come after a secular identity is established that I really want to help promote the content creators that are working in that space. I launched a podcast in 2015 and we traveled the country and we created the whole thing from scratch. We didn't have
Hmm.
podcast backgrounds. And it was a beautiful experience, but what I quickly, learned is, creating content's one thing, getting anyone to listen to it is another. It's
Yes.
really hard to have a successful podcast, no matter how brilliant you are or how beautiful your content is. You need access to an audience, and so the idea that I've been sitting on for years and finally was able to do this past year was let's take a bunch of awesome underfunded ragtag content creators, atheist content creators who just need a little help. Let's throw them in a network together and they can promote each other and share each other's audience because there's shared values and identity here. And the questions some of these shows are asking overlap with other shows that are coming at them from different angles. And that's been the beauty so far. And we started with the Beyond Atheism guys, which you had on your show a few weeks ago, who really asked my favorite question, which is now what? Okay, cool. You're an atheist. Like, okay, you can go many different directions now. What does that tell you about how to handle artificial intelligence taking our jobs, or how does it handle raising a kid? Like, those are real questions. Like,
Yeah.
atheism's for me, who's been an atheist for God, 20, 30 years now, like, I'm frankly bored by the atheism question. Like, I haven't heard anything new in 25 years in that space. And
Exactly. Yeah.
the interesting, juicy questions are like, how do you raise a kid ethically? Like, oh, there's so much unknown in that space and so much we need to learn and practice and figure out. How do you ethically engage our economy? How do you build communities ethically? Right? As a community organizer, do I go fully egalitarian like a lot of our socialist roots, or do we use some of the hierarchies that exist in other organizations like churches? Do I, as the leader of the community, get on stage and talk about our beliefs and values, or do I avoid being the face and the center of it, and we kind of use a more equitable model? Like, those are ethical questions. Those are organizing questions that are super juicy and fun. And I don't have, we're not going to find a perfect answer to anytime soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have podcasts that explore that, or in some cases, we're finding, like in the Spanish speaking world, there aren't even shows that address the questions around theism and atheism, like the alternative. So I wasn't expecting to do this, but we might be bringing on a show that goes at the arguments of God, but for a Spanish speaking audience.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, underserved spaces. We have a Jewish humanist podcast launching next week called Amusing Jews. So a secular Jewish perspective, like so secular, they barely ever talk about religion. They're mostly just, talking to Hollywood writers about the shows they work on and their hobbies and Festivus.
Yes. Nice.
So anyways, like, this has been the idea, but what's been really, really, really fascinating is trying to just figure out what programs we should do as a community organization. So most atheist groups, if you were to, go pick a city, Houston or New York or Miami or something, and go to their local atheist group or the local humanist group, usually they have a speaker event, right? We do some type of educational program. They have a service program, usually some type of giving back to their local community. And if you're lucky, maybe like a recovering from religion subgroup that supports people with religious trauma. But one of the struggles you find when you talk to most organizers is people will check them out. Like, atheism is still a controversial idea. There's lots of new people identifying as atheists. So people will explore it, but they don't always stay, right? We don't have a 2,000-year tradition of like space you want to hang out in, or rituals that like make you feel good, like Thanksgiving turkey or something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So how do we build spaces like that, and what is actually the goal of spaces like that? And one of the things I've learned recently, weirdly, by reading church planning books, which I never thought, I took this job and there's nobody that's had a job like this before me, so I have no one to I have no mentors to go ask for advice. Atheist community organizer is like a new job title in this world. There's like 4 of me in the world.
I know.
Four
Yeah.
people.
There's not that many people doing that. Yeah.
And one of the things I found in this book recently was about, it's about how to turn around failing churches. And he talked a lot about how people think they come for belonging, right? Like you want to find other people like you who share your identity and you just want to like be among them.
Hmm.
And that's nice and that's true. A lot of people do want belonging. That's language we all use. Every religious and non-religious community I know uses this language. But I find that's not why they stay. Like I find belonging in a political organization, but I won't go to every event. Um, you you stay in an organization and you become active in an organization, you start donating to that community when it transforms you, when it's something that helps you grow as a human being. And this has been the most transformational idea for me as an organizer, which is like need to not just represent people, we need to help people. I'm suddenly looking at things like recovering from religion not as just a space people can belong together, but as like truly trauma care. I'm looking at, we added a smart recovery program, which is a secular addiction recovery program for any type of addiction. It's usually people who like really hated the higher power language in AA. They want something that's more based on science. Smart recovery is the place you should go, or at least start. And yeah, like we are literally helping people's lives. If I can help you with addiction, yeah, of course, this is the community you're going to give your time and your money and raise your kids in the rest of your life. And that helped us launch a new program called Atheist Adventures. And
Okay.
we, last year, we went to Death Valley and looked at the stars with an astronomer.
Oh
And we
man,
were
that's cool.
asking the question of like, how do we recreate religious experience in a secular sense? Right? Like we know we experience awe, we know we feel meaning in certain moments. Well, a lot of us, it's being in nature and feeling small or large based on the context of the experience, right?
Hmm.
That's what most religious experiences are, right? Like the reason you walk into a giant chapel in Europe and you just feel amazing is because you feel so small suddenly. It's designed for you to feel small.
Right.
And you have a weird moment in your brain where everything kind of fires. Well, yeah, you can feel that in Death Valley on a moonless night with an astronomer doing a star talk.
Real quick, I have to tell this story because as an atheist,
Yeah.
I happened to be in London and I went to St. Paul's Cathedral.
Yeah.
And I had that exact experience of just, recognizing that, oh, it was the architecture and the brilliance of the space
History,
and yeah, and the
beauty.
the
Yeah.
beauty of it and the light filtering through the stained glass and like, there was an experience. There was some legitimate experience as a, straight up atheist. And that, we can definitely have, especially in nature, I think is a great way to experience that. The experience of awe and it be an entirely secular experience.
Yeah, Alain de Botton wrote a whole book on this about how
Mhm.
we should be using architecture from a secular perspective to create memory and awe and like celebrate secularism. And I completely agree. But yeah, what does that mean in different contexts and how do we communally do that is, I think, a really interesting question. Like, we haven't figured out, there are very few secular rituals that you'll find in most groups around the world. We have, there's been different attempts. Norway has a coming of age ceremony that they do for like all 16-year-olds, and they spend a year working on like community service projects and kind of blueprints, and then they talk about it, and then the community recognize them as adults. And that's common. Most religions have some form of coming of age ritual, but if you ask most atheist communities in the US, like we'll get there. Like I totally imagine that if we are committed to community the way we're building, we're going to have some types of rituals that represent those. But yeah, what they look like might be different. And because we have no holy books and we don't need to stick to a tradition just because it's been tradition, it will look different in different places. But yeah, most organizers and scholars in the space talk a lot about birth, death, marriage, coming of age as like
Yeah.
four of the biggest rituals we just have in our society. And we have secular versions of them in most places. I know not in Iran always, but like you can go to Vegas and get married.
Right.
That's pretty secular experience 9 times out of
Yeah.
10. Um, but yeah, like actually thinking about if we want to create our own unique cultural ritual or culture, right? Like, can atheist communities do culture making? I'm of the opinion, yes. Like we did an I've been looking through the history of Atheists United since I took this job, and I found that we did a arts festival 25 years ago in LA, right?
Oh,
Like,
cool. Okay.
what is secular and atheist art? And it is whatever we gather around. It is not because some old dudes in Europe decided this is the only book that is true.
Right.
It's because we, through basically a democratic process, like decided this is our ritual and we can find value in it or we can let go of it. And to me, that's beautiful. Like that's what informs humanism for me. Like humanism, which I know we're departing a little bit from atheism, but I think they're so tied, and 90% of atheists wind up humanists in the U.S. at least. That
And
humanism,
this podcast is it's
yeah,
about
yeah,
humanism. Yeah.
humanism starts from the idea that like magic isn't real, right? That it is a naturalist world, that God and gods aren't things that matter to our universe. And so we are these small little Homo sapiens on a small planet in a small galaxy in an unbelievably massive universe, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, now we want to understand the world around us. How would we do that? Oh, well, we'd probably come up with some method to test our ideas, and things like science suddenly become tools that we use for understanding the natural world, which is why science is so popular in humanist spaces. If we could find a better way to come to answers than science, we would use that. But it's the best method we've come up with yet. Well, how do we think about morals and ethics and answer these questions? Well, using tools like science and recognizing that with no gods and no magic, right? Like we're the only ones that can solve the problems that matter to us, and we have to create or feel the meaning in those things.
Right.
We can start thinking about moral responsibility. We can think about our interaction with everyone around us. And somebody might go, hey, but like, I'm a libertarian. I think I can go off into the woods and not impact anyone else, and it doesn't matter. Well, science and the natural world tells us that we're all interconnected, right? Like
Mhm.
the air I breathe is the air you breathe, right? The history of the universe all moved through time to where like I'm made of the same stardust that you're made of.
Yeah.
And because there are interactions between those things, like why isn't there moral responsibility between those, right? Like I live in an ecosystem. I don't live in a video game where I can exist separate from you. And with that knowledge that I live in an ecosystem, this is my one and only life, and we're using tools like compassion and reason to understand our place and how to be good in it, that's how we figure these things out, right? Like I think it's so obvious and beautiful and exciting when we think about it that way, but we don't always get the narrative. You lose theism, and maybe you're biased by the idea that I must have come from something, or that I must have a church that gives me the answers. But the story of the universe and the idea that you can solve problems, or you and your community can solve problems and understand your place in it and figure out how to solve moral and ethical problems, like I think that's as beautiful, if not more beautiful. And I would argue more beautiful. Yeah, I personally would argue more beautiful because it will always improve based on new evidence and new experience. We won't just accept an answer because it's been the answer before. If we can find a new way to improve upon it, we have to.
Man, I think that's got to be where we wrap, because that's very well said. It's amazing to meet you in that there are very few of us, right? There aren't that many people who care about these things in the way that you've just expressed, right? And that's what we're trying to communicate here on this podcast. I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I want to also give you an opportunity to tell people how they can participate with Atheists United. How can they find you? How can they interact?
Yeah, so Atheists United, we're based in Los Angeles, but we consider ourselves a California nonprofit. We have chapters in San Luis Obispo and Santa Clarita. And I would encourage people to become members, especially if you're in California. That's an ongoing monthly supporter of our organization. Donation is always helpful. I'm a nonprofit guy.
Yep.
I have to
Yeah.
ask. But you can follow us on social media. We are on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and probably going to move to TikTok soon. You can find us on YouTube. Yeah, it's wild. We didn't even have time to get into this, but like the growing spectrum of atheist experiences, right? Like a third generation atheist family has a kid in LA, and that kid goes to USC and only has atheist friends and then works at Netflix with other atheists. Like them trying to find community is so night and day different than third generation evangelical. He comes out as gay and atheist in Kentucky, rural Kentucky, and like finding a community that's atheist is life or death for them.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and yet until we have more atheist spaces, they have to share community where one is desperate to talk about religion and its harm and how they interact with it, where one is like, I don't understand why anyone talks about religion.
Yeah.
And right now they share spaces. In LA, we're one of those unique cities where we have like people who came here from all over. We have religions like Scientology and Jehovah's Witness that are a lot stronger here than other cities. And we also have like one of the most secular, generations and multi-generations here. And they're all trying to find community at the same time. And we're all trying to figure out, we can politically organize together, but what does gathering look like? What does a party look like? What does care look like? That's why supporting Atheists United is so cool and critical, is that we are incubating a lot of the programs that we hope other groups around the country will eventually take off with. We happen to be big. We happen to be really active. We're throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall right now. And if something works, we're going to share it around the country, around the world, and hope more people do it.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, we will have links in the show notes, of course, but I want to thank you, Evan, for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Final thoughts on the episode. Well, it's hard to overstate how good it is to find other people in the secular world who also have a secular grace focus. Obviously, Evan wouldn't use that term per se, but the things that he does is secular grace, boots on the ground, humanism, touching people's lives. I highly recommend that you listen to Evan's original podcast. That is the first podcast within the Atheists United Studios podcast network, called Humanist Experience. He did that with Sarah Blaine. Sarah lived on the streets of LA with the homeless, trying to find practical ways of helping people. I couldn't think of a better description of what secular grace is. Boots on the ground, blood, sweat, and tears, humanism. That is the kind of humanism that Evan Clark and Atheists United represents. As you can imagine, this is why I said yes when Evan asked for this podcast to become a part of the podcast network. Evan's work is really important. It is humane. It is loving. It is on the right side of history. And I'm just excited to be a tiny part of this. I'd like to mention the other sibling podcasts that are a part of the Atheists United Studios podcast network. You've already heard from Nathan Alexander and Troy Taveras of the Beyond Atheism podcast. I interviewed them back in November. I just mentioned the Humanist Experience. That is with Evan Clark and Sarah Blaine. Very well worth your time to listen to. It is kind of an NPR style, very highly produced, beautiful podcast. And then the most recent podcast to join the network besides mine is The Amusing Jews, who Evan talked about in this interview. I know that Evan is working hard to bring other podcasts online. I anticipate having guest exchanges with those podcasts, and I'm looking forward to all the exciting things that we will do together in the next year. I want to thank Evan for being on the podcast, for living secular grace without knowing what that word is, for exemplifying it for us, giving us a practical example to try to follow. Thank you, Evan, for being on the podcast and for inviting us to be a part of the podcast network. The secular grace thought of the week is what obviously follows out of the conversation with Evan, and that is about secular community and how desperately we as human beings need that. It was incredibly insightful what Evan talked about, that the secular community has to hit this entire spectrum of people, from people who have been abused and suffered at the hands of the church to people who are third generation atheists who have no experience with what faith feels like. And so the more communities that we have, the more opportunity there is to fill the niches for the specific needs of the people. I cannot say enough how important Arlene's work as a community manager has been and will continue to be. I am in continual gratitude for Arlene's work. For those of you who have been a part of the Deconversion Anonymous Facebook group, you know how important Arlene's work is. I want you to be asking yourself how you can participate in the community, how you can lead in the community. Do you want to lead a group on a particular topic? Do you want to lead a book club? Anything that brings people together is vitally important. In 2023, as we watch COVID in the rearview mirror, I'm really interested in in-person connectivity. If you'd be willing to host something in your local area and there are 2 or 3 or 4 other people in the area, that is the next step for us. And I'm very interested in seeing that happen. Another thing happening in 2023, we're going to have more blog posts from multiple people, including Jimmy, who's a part of the Deconversion Anonymous Facebook group, Arlene herself. If you are interested in writing on the topic of secular grace or deconversion or related secular topics, I'd be willing to have you on the blog as well. If you are interested in doing social media outreach or the YouTube channel or any other myriad of ways that you could participate, please get in touch with me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com or reach out to Arlene on Facebook. Coming up, we have next week, I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist. Troy and Brian interviewed me and I interviewed them back in November. My episode on their podcast aired in late November, and I will be releasing my interview of Brian and Troy next. So look forward to that. That is a great conversation. I love those guys. They are also a sibling podcast, whether or not they're a part of this podcast network. After that, I have Rachel Hunt of the Recovering from Religion Foundation. And man, that's an amazing conversation. Absolutely loved Rachel. I've got a bunch of community members coming up who I will be doing interviews for. But the thing I'm super excited about, I will be interviewing Jennifer Michael Hecht, who I have quoted 1,000 times from her book, Doubt. Her new book is called The Wonder Paradox, and it is about how poetry can impact our lives. And if you're thinking to yourself, man, I'm not into poetry, trust me, it's bigger than that. It is about the awe that we experience as human beings from a very secular perspective. Jennifer Michael Hecht is amazing. Can't wait for that interview and can't wait to share that with you. That'll be in early March. Until then, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. The beat is called Waves by Mackay Beats. If you want to get in touch with me to be a guest on the show, email me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com. For blog posts, quotes, recommendations, and full episode transcripts, head over to gracefulatheist.com. This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios podcast network.